Good afternoon, y'all. It's so nice to be here together. Thank you for making space on this sunny day. And welcome to the 39th annual NOFA Vermont Winter Conference, which is also the kickoff to our year-long celebration of our 50th birthday. We're so excited that you're here for this different, but hopefully still engaging, community building and inspiring month of learning, connecting, and visioning the food and farming system for our shared future. Some of you have been with us. Just last Sunday, we had the featured panel, Collective Wisdom, Elders and Longtime Leaders of the Organic Movement, where we were joined by 7 longtime organic farmers to share their stories, challenges, and triumphs, and imagine ways we can apply past lessons learned toward a thriving future. If you weren't able to attend, I highly recommend you check out the recording. All registrants should have received access to the recordings for all of last week's workshops, including the panel in your weekly conference email. It's really lovely to see you here today. And if you have any questions or tech issues come up, please feel free to reach out to our conference coordinator, Livy Bolger, livy@NOFA-VT.org. My name is Grace, and I am the executive director of NOFA Vermont. We have so been missing seeing all of you in person, but really grateful for these ways we're still finding to connect. Thank you for continuing to show up to our shared work of building a thriving agricultural future. If you're new to the conference, welcome. We're so glad that you're here. And if you want, you can put in the chat how many years you've been attending the conference. Thanks to those of you who have been with us the last couple of weeks. And many folks are tuning in. Oh, here, my toddler is joining me as I introduce this. So please feel free to put in the chat how many years you've been coming to the conference by clicking attendees and panelists and just chat away. For those of you who've been attending last several weeks, we're glad to have you back. And we have this short introduction to share before we welcome our panelists. NOFA Vermont is a membership organization. Our members are our heart. You all help us build an agricultural movement that centers people, land, and justice. Thank you for being a part of our community. We so appreciate your support of our work to build a Vermont agricultural system that benefits all living things. If you're not a member, please consider joining the wonderful crew to strengthen our voice and support our important shared work. Feel free to introduce yourselves and put your names and how long you've been attending the conference into the chat. Megan, our wonderful tech support, is prompting everyone, and feel free to drop your name, your farm, where you're calling in from today. Given that this conference is largely themed on place, land, and agriculture, we want to begin our time together with an acknowledgement of our place in a colonial land history of the state of Vermont. We, the organizers of the NOFA Vermont Winter Conference, acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Elnu tribe of the Abenaki, Nulhegan Band of the Kusuk, Abenaki Nation of the Missisquoi, and the Kusuk Traditional Band of the Coos Abenaki Nation, on which we are learning, working, and organizing here today. This land is known by its original and current inhabitants as Ndakina, the Dawn Land. The borders created by non-native governments associated with Vermont, Canada, and the United States are colonial divisions. Therefore, we acknowledge that the laws that allow the original peoples and the recognized tribes in the colonial state of Vermont to pursue their own culture does not ensure full tribal access in their own native homeland. We know it's important to make this land acknowledgement because NOFA's mission invites us to consider how we relate to, steward, and live on the land we know as Vermont to promote an economically viable, ecologically sound, and socially just food system for current and future generations. With honor and respect, we invite people gathering at this conference to deepen all of our understanding of the ongoing process of colonization and its continuous impact on us all. We ask that each of us commit ourselves to decolonizing our ways of thinking, behaving, relating to the land, and the design of legal structures so that we can repair relationships with Native communities in the land, support reconciliation efforts among all people, and ensure the inclusion of the Abenaki Nation. I'd like to share some ways you can learn from Indigenous leaders throughout the conference in commitment to this goal. 2 weeks ago, Sunday, we learned from Sherry Mitchell, a Native American leader and land activist raised on the Penobscot Indian Reservation. The Abenaki Land Link project was featured in the Community Food Access panel on the 17th. If you missed those, you can access the recordings of these offerings through the weekly links. All conference attendees will have the opportunity to stream the film Gather, a fight to revitalize our Native foodways from home all month. Tune in for a question and answer discussion with the filmmaker and a panel of activists, chefs, and scientists featured in the film tomorrow, Monday, February 22nd from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. And there are several workshops and roundtables also aimed at helping us develop a better understanding of how race, class, power, and privilege are all at play in agriculture right here in Vermont. We hope that this conference offers a moment to engage meaningfully in deep thinking about our role in these structures and how we can move towards a more just world. Please consider attending some of these workshops and roundtables or checking out the recordings, including Advancing BIPOC Land Access in Ndakina by leaders from the Nefolk Land Trust, which is Northeast Farmers of Color, the Everytown Project, Vermont Land Trust, Vital Communities, and NOFA Vermont. The Cows Don't Milk Themselves, Milk with Dignity and Farm Worker Rights in the Time of COVID, led by Migrant Justice leaders. Participatory Capacity Building for an Inclusive Organic Movement by Ade Romero Briones of First Nations Development Institute and Jennifer Taylor of the Organic Farming Association and Lola's Organic Farm. Community Food Access, Growing for Each Other from leaders all over the state. We encourage you to attend these opportunities as a crucial piece of understanding this place we all call home. This conference would not be possible without all of the support of our sponsors who are listed on our website. We invite you to check out their profiles and send them some love. This event is our biggest fundraiser of the year, and all of you sponsors help make it successful. We want to especially call out the following cultivator, nourisher, and nurturer level sponsors: Meadows Beef Farm, The Alchemist, City Market, Johnson Family Foundation, the Lintillac Foundation, Forrest C. and Francis H. Latner Foundation, King Arthur Baking Company, Lawson's Finest Liquids, Stonyfield Organic, Vermont Family Farms, and our media sponsor 7 Days. In addition to these sponsors, I want to thank the other contributors that helped make this conference possible: the NOFA Vermont board and staff, our wonderful volunteers who work behind the scenes, presenters this year from all over the country, and all of you for participating. It would not be possible without you. Thank you. So now I'm going to turn to our panelists for today, and thank you all for welcoming my daughter Zusa, who just came in after her nap. She wanted to make a quick cameo appearance. As we celebrate the anniversary of 50 years of NOFA Vermont, we are living through enormous disruption and challenge. We have seen ever more plainly that many of the structures on which our lives rest are brittle and precarious. Yet we have also seen the power of a connected and resilient food system. We've seen the strength of people coming together and showing up for each other. What happens when we stand in solidarity? We seek to use this moment to do some, as Adrienne Marie Brown says, future scouting together, to imagine boldly these next 50 years so we don't revert back to business as usual, but instead we move boldly towards a future that values people and planet. Sherry Mitchell, who kicked off our conference on the 7th, challenged us by asking, when our children and our grandchildren ask us how we responded to the times we're living through, we want to be able to say, we woke up, we showed up, we stood up. We did what we had to do to protect your right to exist. We did everything that we could to protect the animals, the land, and the waters, and to ensure that Mother Earth was given the right to live with all of her biodiversity intact. We did everything within our power to ensure that you would not only survive, but have the ability to thrive. We stood up for you in the same way that our ancestors stood up for us. And so we've assembled this particular panel of farmers, food producers, and food systems change makers because these people all represent a wide range of solutions and ideas that we will need for our shared future. We're excited to hear their bold and brave ideas. NOFA's mission statement asks us to work for a future that centers people, planet, and justice in agriculture. We're excited to hear from all of you on how we might get there. Before we get into the meat of our conversation, in order for all those people listening to get to know a bit about each of you, could you please introduce yourself and share who you are and how you work in Vermont in ag? I'm going to call on each of you just because it can be tricky with Zoom. So Abbie Corse, would you like to start?
I knew you were going to start with me. Hi, everybody. Abbie Corse. I farm down here at the Corse Family Dairy with my parents. We steward a conserved farm and have for 153 years. We ship milk to Organic Valley. And my father was the first certified master grazer for the Dairy Grazing Apprenticeship Program, which is a place that I see a lot of exciting potential for the future in terms of training up people in a systems of thinking towards agriculture that does not take more than it gives back. That's a little bit to ground truth me. Onward to the next.
Thanks, Abbie. Amber, you want to share?
Hi, everyone. My name is Amber. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm in Wantastigock, also known as Brattleboro, Vermont. And I am part of the SUSU community farm, where we are focused on sowing seeds of liberation in southern Vermont. And we're an Afro-Indigenous stewarded farm that, works to create spaces for Black, Indigenous people of color to thrive and experience safety and connection in Vermont.
Thanks for being here, Amber. Taylor, do you want to go?
I'm one-handed here. I'm Taylor. I run Footprint Farm in Starksboro with my husband Jake and squirming baby Theo here. Our farm's really small. We just have 3 acres in production, one of which is in cover crop each year. We grow vegetables mostly for a 150 member CSA program, sell to local grocery stores and restaurants. And our CSA is also supported by add-on subscriptions and online store. So we work with about 12 to 15 other farms and producers in the area to create kind of a full diet CSA program. In addition to farming, last year I started a project called Habit Farming, which is a collection of resources for farmers that helps with business planning, organization, and goal setting.
Thanks, Taylor. Marita, you want to go? Marita, you want to go?
Hi, my name is Marita. I'm originally from Bolivia, but I'm part of the Migrant Justice team. And, Migrant Justice is a grassroots organization of dairy farm workers, mostly from South Mexico and Guatemala. And we are here organizing for human rights. Thank you. Thanks,
Marita. Jenna?
Sure, yeah. My name is Jenna Baird, and I live and work on a 4th generation farm in Chittenden, Vermont, the Baird Farm. Our farm's kind of in the middle of a transition. My partner Jacob and I came back to the farm about 6 years ago, and we own the retail part of the business where my parents still own the production end of it. We tap around 14,000 trees on the farm here. We do a lot of agritourism. We ship a lot of syrup across the US. We're getting into growing Christmas trees on the farm. And we've been, I think, certified organic for 5 years, going into our 6th year. Had our inspection last week. And fun fact about me is I like to grow giant pumpkins.
Nice, nice. Naomi?
My name's Naomi. My pronouns are they, them, and she, her. I live in Putney, but right now I'm in Brattleboro at the SUSU Botanica, and I'm also co-steward of the SUSU community farm. And the only thing that I would add on to what Amber said is that this year we're really excited to have a pilot of our CSA community supported agriculture box will be predominantly heritage crops, African American and Wabanaki heritage crops, and culturally relevant foods and medicines. And so that's really exciting to have that available for our community here in Vermont. And also I love giant pumpkins, so that's really cool, Jenna.
We also have like a lot of following the giant pumpkin news in our home with the like, how are people doing it this year? What's going on? It's a whole obsession. Hi, Theo. I think we got everyone here. So thanks all of you for being willing to take the time and joining us on this first sunny day of a long month of gray. It's really nice to see you. And we were initially planning to kick off this panel with a really big, sort of open, inspiring question, which was, in our wildest dreams, where do we see the food system in 50 years? What does thriving look like 50 years out? But we had a planning call, and when we started talking as a team, we really noticed a lot of conditions would need to change here in Vermont in order for us to be able to be freed up to really imagine together in that way. We're going to get there. We're going to talk about that inspirational question, but we really want to spend the first part of our time naming some of these foundational issues first. The first issue that came up for us as a group was around this very primary reality of land and land access. Who is even in a position to currently imagine innovating on a farm of their own? Why do certain people end up owning farmland and others lacking access or being excluded? We noticed among our small panel that 2 of the 3 white farmers on the panel grew up on the land they are now farming, with the land passing from one generation to the other. None of the BIPOC farmers on this panel shared in that experience. Marita, you work with migrant farm workers who work land and do a lot of the labor of farming here in Vermont, but many or most of whom do not have access to own their own land. Could you kick us off by talking a little bit more about land access and, some of the legal structures? What would need to change to make a more equitable path to farming in Vermont and through land access?
Sure, thank you. So, first, to understand the context of the people that are members of Migrant Justice, as I was saying, most are from South Mexico and Guatemala, and they are here trying to figure out a best way to bring something back home. And why is this? It's kind of a forced migration. People are forced to migrate because the reality in our countries is that because of international treaties, because of the climate change crisis and everything, people have been losing their land in their home place, and even, losing opportunities to be there. But at the same time, because of colonialism, we have in our minds that we need to make a lot of money and come to this country for the American dream and be successful. However, when people come here and see the reality is that you're working in a farm, that you're never going to have access of going outside or giving your own opinions, or even, if you work there years and years and the farm owners decides to close the farm because their younger generations are not going to follow with the business, they are never going to take you into account as being someone that can inherit that farm, even that you have been working there for years. So nothing belongs to you. Nothing. You are here always like in transition, and also you're invisible. And so when we talk about the people that are milking the cows, for example, they do the heaviest work at the farms. They always are like milking, cleaning the manure, doing a lot of veterinary work without the recognitions of being veterinaries. And it's important to see that even, in our minds, because we come with this oppression, we still feel like we cannot ask for more things. We cannot ask and say, hey, I've been here working for this, I'm doing this work. I need to be recognized for that and respected as a human being and not just a machine or a labor force. So that's how, the reality and the context of the people in the farms are. Fortunately, because of the organization, we've been able to gather together and have people coming together and talk with each other and recognize these things and start like a part of healing, but at the same time, taking action to change those things. So I think, yeah, for us being immigrants, and especially when they're undocumented immigrants, even if there are things in the system that are accessible, because you're undocumented, you don't have access to that. You're not eligible for applying to many, many things. So what do we need to make to bring change? What we're trying to do is, we're not trying to fix the system. We're trying to build our own system. We're trying to create our own ways to have access to the things that we need, but also to the healing that we need, to know that we're not coming here to just make money and buy more plastic things for our kids back home. We are here to really do a healing process with the earth, a healing process with our communities, with our people, and then be visible. Because I think the biggest violence that people can cause is to make others invisible. So yeah, I think we need to all to start seeing these realities and stop trying to do things for others, but giving them the power and empowering people to just taking these steps to independence, to change the system, to bring our own things.
Thanks, Marita. And thanks for naming these sort of different kinds of tools for change making that we'll be talking about. There's, I think, some need for, and this is something we wrestle with a lot, like incremental, slow little bits of change that's really about harm mitigation, and then really visionary, build something different work that's really about visioning a whole different way. And so I think, this panel is a place to explore both of those ideas and hold that we're really needing some visionary work that's not going to be fixed by little incremental bits. Although, of course, we can't tire of that. Amber and Naomi, this is a question to both of you around your process working to secure land currently to have a permanent home for the SUSU community farm. So this is sort of around the same theme of land access. You've led a mix of crowdfunding campaigns, you push to leverage land easements, and you're getting community buy-in to access land. But how do land access, affordability here in Vermont, how might we shift commitment to how we invest as community? How do we need to shift Vermont to make Vermont a place that a wider diversity of people have access and can live and thrive? Is there anything from your experience that you could speak to here? Alette.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, really centering what Marita just shared, because that's literally everything. We have so many panels, but we really don't need to. All we have to do is listen to what she just said, and that gives you the answer of exactly what to do, And I think that I'm going to center, some of the things that a good friend of mine, Katrina, who's one of the leaders at Black Lives Matter in Burlington, speaks about a lot, because I think it's really important. And it's that we need to focus not on understanding, but on listening and redistributing resources and meeting needs. So oftentimes our focus is on trying to understand this worldview and this way that, people of color are thinking and all of these things, instead of just listening and meeting the needs, And so for example, if my kid goes to a school and they have a peanut allergy policy, I don't need to understand the history of allergies or all of this different stuff in order to not pack peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for my kids. All I need to do is listen to, this is a problem, this is harming certain children, and I need to do something to change it, So it's really not about understanding and doing all of this work to understand white supremacy and how these systems function and blah, blah, blah. That's really important work to do, but that's work that people need to be doing on their own time. And there needs to be a lot more energy put into the action of redistribution of resources and wealth, because, Black and brown people aren't really concerned with spending lots of energy trying to educate people and get them to understand. All we really need is for people to trust and redistribute, the people who have the access to all of those resources. And I'll let Naomi add some stuff too.
Thanks, Amber, and thanks, Marita. I agree with a lot of those points. The only thing that I would say differently is that I don't think we can talk about this sort of topic without acknowledging like the history of farming and land access. Like, I think we need to recognize that theft and exploitation of both land and people are what led to the prosperity of this nation, and that it's always been a factor in who has access. And, you know, it's like Black History Month, and you've probably seen posts or articles about the history of farming in relation to Black people, and maybe you've come across some numbers, something like 98% of Vermont farms and farmlands are owned by white people. But I wonder how many people actually think about like why that is, right? And like one answer is really easy, it's that there's a larger white population, but even that needs like investigation, like why is that? And I'm also curious to know like how many people up here like know what sharecropping is and know how it connects to slavery. And I wonder how many people realize that Black sharecroppers in the South have worked on the lands that their ancestors were enslaved on, and how that affects you. You know, like my grandfather was a sharecropper in Mississippi, and one of the few reasons I'm up here trying to work with land and grow food and not down in Mississippi is because my father said fuck no to picking cotton on land that his ancestors were enslaved on. And can you blame him? I can't, right? I wouldn't want to be having to contend with that right now, every day of my life. So we have to understand that along with the legacy of living and working this land for centuries in some cases and millennia in others, that there's this history of violence that is associated with land that shows up as trauma in Black and brown bodies. And so when you ask what I think has to shift or change, the only truthful answer I can give is everything, right? From the most commonly accepted model of farming to the levels of awareness of the history to acknowledgement of whose voices are in the room, whose voices are in this space right now and whose aren't, you know? And so I think everything has to change, everything has to shift because, you know, like I'm beginning with the vision, right? I don't have a legacy necessarily of farming. I do, but in a different way, right? I haven't been farming land up here in Vermont for hundreds of years or whatever it is, or generations. And so I'm beginning from this point here. I'm beginning from the vision. SUSU is beginning from the vision. And like Marita said, we aren't trying to change the system. We're trying to build something new.
Thank you, Naomi. Yeah, we've been, you know, I think looking at agriculture without sort of grappling with these twin histories of genocide and enslavement of people is, you know, trying to have a conversation that starts in this snapshot of a moment without reckoning with those huge forces that really have unbroken lineages, I think won't work and is really harmful. And I appreciate that each of you so far have named a process, you brought up the word healing, you know, and so I think what does that begin to look like before we can begin any of the rest of the work is a question that I'm sitting with and I'm hearing come up. And a lot of it looks like work that y'all are doing. Is there anything else that you want to say right now on land access and these histories? We'll come back to it, I'm sure. Another one of these, the second issue that came up as we were trying to really begin to even have a conversation around sort of visioning 50 years out as a team was around gendered work and how women and femme people experience their experience of caregiving, parenting and caregiving in other forms is so often pushed to the side or ignored as part of the conditions around farming. And, you know, I think we have to thank Kimberly Crenshaw for this idea of intersectionality. Many of us, all of us have multiple kinds of identities going on at any time, right? And so often these identities and these marginalized parts of ourselves are, you know, compounding. And the reality that gendered work has come to the fore even more in the time of COVID. So Abbie, you know, another thing that I wanted to ask you about that we had gained language around during COVID is this notion of essential work. And I think that's something that each of you could speak on. But we wanted to highlight on this panel the intersection of caregiving and farming as both essential work. And this is something that came up last week, actually, on our Elders and Wisdom Keepers panel as a challenge that has really persisted across generations. So you've written on the gendered double impact of mothering and farming. How does our valuation of caregiving need to shift to be able to boldly imagine our thriving future?
So many thoughts come up in regard to this, but in light of how we've framed today so far, I think this is just another aspect of the system that needs to be reimagined, reworked, and revisioned. And, you know, I think it struck me so deeply as a mother, becoming a mother was around the same time that I came back to the farm, and I do not farm with my husband, which is a fairly odd occurrence in the dairy world. And so the realities that were coming up for my parents and I, as we tried to figure out how we made our way forward in this, still trying to function in this traditional family farm manner, but with these factors that were new. I couldn't be both my father on the farm and my mother in the home, which was what needed to happen so our bills could be paid. And so we had to figure out ways to get through that. And what that looked like was the first 3 years of my son's life, he was in care that I knew he was safe, but I wasn't comfortable with where he was. I didn't feel that he was being nurtured. I didn't feel that he was receiving the best care. And I think, so we've seen during COVID, all this talk about essential work, and yet these are systems that we don't uplift, that we don't empower, and that we don't invest in. We don't invest in our care economy. We don't invest in our mothers and femmes and our, this has been disproportionately impacted in the BIPOC communities. And so I sort of just feel like anything that I'm experiencing, obviously as like a white and highly privileged farmer, I just need to work that back naturally and understand that those systems are impacting the BIPOC community in ways that I can't even imagine. And so how do we ensure that moving forward, that this ridiculous, I feel, expectation that women who are farming, that anybody who is farming should have the expectation that they need to do so with their children there, needs to be put aside. If a person chooses to farm with their children, if they choose to work caregiving into their farming, and I would advocate that farming in its best essence is caregiving, right, of the planet and biodiversity and nature and all of that around us. So if a person chooses that, I bow to you. But we need to create systems where I can have my child safely in care. Marita can have children safely in care. Amber and Naomi can have children safely in care. Taylor can sleep when she needs to and still be able to farm and show up and do the work that they wish to do in this world, not worrying about whether their children are safe or not. And so I spend a lot of time thinking about that.
Thanks, Abbie. Does anyone else who's parenting or caregiving in some form want to speak to this intersection? I see no one unmuting. So I'm gonna move on. I really just wanted to say, we really didn't feel we could move into any visionary conversation without first naming these behemoths of inequity, just endemic to agriculture as the ground. This is the conditions we're working with. This is the reality. So we can try to just start without this foundation, but it just doesn't work. And so I think a lot of what we're trying to do is just say, this is the water in which we're swimming. And if we can rally together, we will rally together. We need to rally together to shift these foundational issues. It's going to take all of us pushing from so many directions to shift these issues. And then we can really begin to imagine boldly together. So we're going to turn back to this initial question around what does thriving in food and farming in Vermont in 50 years look like? And I'm going to ask each panelist a sort of specific, personalized question about this, their part of the vision. And then we're also going to have time for everyone to speak sort of more broadly. But first, I'm going to turn to Jenna. You're currently engaged in a farm transition from the older generation in your family. You're actively building a much more diversified set of products and farm enterprises and changing some of the way things are done on the operation. One goal you named as particularly important to you when we were speaking was creating a space for your parents and the rest of your family to live and stay on the farm. You spoke as we were planning about the power of real intergenerational reliance and mutual support. How will this commitment to intergenerational mutual reliance, taking care of our parents and community elders, and in return relying on them as well, form a foundational part of a thriving future?
Yeah, so thank you, Grace. When I first heard this question, it really resonated with me, and I, especially given what we're going through on our farm right now, transitioning to the next generation. But kind of 6 key things popped up in my head when I thought about it. So I have storytelling, knowledge, networks, independence, planning, and renewal were the 6 components I thought of. So in storytelling, I feel it's so important to share the story behind agriculture and preserving the history behind food. So on our farm, we do, like I mentioned before, we do a lot of agritourism. We spend a lot of time with folks mostly that are visiting Vermont. We bring them through our sugar bush. We show them the sugar house. We kind of talk a lot about what used to happen on the farms, and my great grandmother here making maple syrup on the farm, and we stop at some of our trees that she actually used to tap. So really like putting meaning behind people's food, and sometimes we'll pull out old photos, which is kind of fun to share with people, and so they really get a story behind what they're consuming, and it really changes the whole experience of what they're eating. So storytelling is really important because it adds value to our food. Another piece that plays into the mutual reliance is knowledge, which is kind of an obvious one, but basically older generations have a wealth of wisdom to share with us. And I think a lot about our farm and my parents sharing with Jacob and I the history of the land and talking about problem solving over time and what's worked for them and what hasn't worked for them, and just teaching us kind of efficiency. So that efficiency, in turn, we can kind of bypass the learning curve and build on that knowledge to create a more thriving agricultural community. And then community and networking. So those older generations have been around for years. They've established networks in their community and relationships, and it's such an asset to the next generation. And so when we first came back to the farm, we spent a lot of time touring other farms and getting to know the people in our community and farmers that have, who have had careers in farming, and we were able to gain a lot of knowledge from that. And it's also a two-way street. So, networking, like my partner and I, we know a lot of young farmers now that we have our foot in the door here after the past 6 years, and we've been able to listen to their innovative ideas and share them with my parents' generation and my parents. So projects on our farm have really benefited from that diverse network of support. And then community and planning, or communication and planning, is a big part of maintaining that thriving agriculture. So thinking about the big picture in the long term is important. And some of those conversations can be really difficult to talk about in transition to the next generation. People are getting older. You're talking about exit plans and sometimes death, which it seems grim, but it's something that you do have to think about. And everything on the farm is connected. So, finances, buildings, the relationships, retirement, everything. So working to have those open communications with everybody in the planning process to honor each other's needs and wants and make that a smooth transition an enriching transition and really set yourself up for success in that way. And then just to others, independence, realizing that mutual support does not mean codependence. So really having everybody contributing their own ideas and building new ideas. We became certified organic when Jacob and I came back to the farm because it was something we really personally valued. And not that it wasn't something my dad valued, but it was something he hadn't put a whole lot of thought into, and he was a little bit skeptical of because there was, he wasn't sure how much he was going to have to do to change the process and everything. But it was something that we pushed for and worked together to make it happen. And now both parties have been very happy with that. And then just renewal. It's been really interesting to think about how we're still doing things on the farm that my great grandmother did. And she had agritourism here in a different kind of way. She had a bed and breakfast here where people would come up from the city and spend time, a full month sometimes, and just kind of connecting to the land and getting to meet my family, I guess. And so it's kind of been interesting how we've returned to that idea and doing agritourism in a different sense, but breathing new life into those old ideas. So those were just 6 components I felt really ring true to how intergenerational work occurs on our farm.
Thank you, Jenna. It's really helpful. My next question is for you, Taylor. You have spoken publicly before about this challenge of just simply surviving economically as a diversified small farmer. This year, you expanded your CSA and fed more of your community members than ever before in this time of a lot of instability. How will farmers and food producers be valued in this thriving agricultural future? What are some of the metrics we should look for? Better quality of farmer and farm worker lives in the next 50 years?
I have to start by saying thanks to everybody. And we had seen these questions ahead of time, and I told everyone I got my first in 18 weeks 20-minute nap with my kid today and wrote out my answer. And now I'm listening to everybody and thinking, that's all wrong. That's not what I should talk about. But I really want to honor that 20 minutes and how special it was to me, especially listening to Abbie talk about how hard it is. I haven't been able to run our business in the way that I'm used to running our business for so long. And that's a big topic of conversation for us going into this year. So we'll honor my first nap of my child's life. So you mentioned changing our farm quite a bit in the last year, and we have totally worn out the word pivot here because we were going to the Shelburne Farmers Market, and that was about a third of our business, and it shut down for last year. So we were looking at replacing about $30,000 of income last March, April, and we were super fortunate that we were able to increase our CSA membership, and it covered that. We got government grants, and we made it through last year pretty okay. Unfortunately, this year is feeling very carbon copy of last year. We just learned that our biggest wholesale customer, which is also a farm, is shutting their doors at the end of next week. So here we are, another $30,000 to $40,000 to try to replace. And I wish I could say that this is unusual on farms, but it's feeling like, you go into farming and your parents, my parents, a lot of people's parents are like, what are you doing? That's really unpredictable. And are you going to make any money? Are you going to eat? Are you going to have health insurance? And I'm like, oh yeah, definitely. And started this blog where I tell people how to better run their business and make things efficient. And here I am, every year trying to replace tens of thousands of dollars. And my big thing is that I want farming to be a career option for people. And right now, the only way to do that is to start a farm. And the only way to start a farm and own it is everything we've already been talking about. How are you going to get land? How are you going to get capital? How are you going to get knowledge? And it seems pretty impossible for a lot of people. So what I've really been trying to work towards is creating business structures that can support my employees for the long term so that they could have an actual career here. Once they think about having babies, they don't have to leave and go get a real job that gets benefits. And now I've gone off script, so I have to look back where I am. So with farming has pretty much always been this way, I think. You know, we are creating a highly labor intensive product and we're not getting much money for it as far as what goes into it. And we're subject to increasingly changing weather conditions, pest pressures, and market shifts. And we've had to be super cunning to stay in business for the long haul, balancing those high capital costs and low product prices. And including the difficulty of finding and acquiring land, the constant turnover of domestic farm labor and low wages, I feel like what I want to see is a local economy that values farms and values healthy, nutrient-dense food the way we value the latest iPhone or the latest whatever trend is going on. And I'd also love to see a shift in an almost unfathomable number of policies that show that our governments value the benefit of farms, the benefit that we can have for soils, for nutrition and overall health of our people, and for our communities. And really my metric for all of this is going to be, in 50 years, can farm owners can we look different than what we look like right now? And can we look at our workforce and can we say confidently and happily that we're going to pay our people a living wage, know that we're going to be able to do that and provide benefits for them and be able to watch them raise their children with us.
Thanks, Taylor. It's interesting to hear you talk about sort of worker, what will the future look like for people who are working on your farm now, and how can this really be durable for everyone? My next question is for you, Marita. You work with a focus on collective power building among and for farm workers, many of whom are immigrants, many of whom are people of color. How might we imagine a stronger coalition between farm owners and farm workers in the next 50 years? Any thoughts on how collectivism might shift the way we do farming in our thriving future? How will those doing farm work be centered rather than just rendered invisible, as you mentioned before, in a thriving future?
Yeah, and I think my hopes and my dreams are for sooner than 50 years, because this has to change now and things have to happen as soon as possible. Because, here in Taylor, her struggles, in Jenna, here in Abbie, and then we have the farmers that don't trust when their workers are organizing, when their workers, the migrant workers, are raising their voices and asking for better wages or better housing. Our community has created a solution that is bringing these big corporations, as like the iPhone or the Apples, the Hanafors, the Ben & Jerry's, the Unilevers that are making profit, to just bring this economic justice. Just coming back to what Amber was saying, reparations, and inspiring with Katrina. I love Katrina. She's back. It's great. To bring that money and that economy back to who's really working the land. I mean, we all eat. We need food. We need the land. We need the nature. So why not to take care of the people that are taking care of it? So I think when we talk about collective, it's not saying like they, them, those there, the immigrants, the Black people, the indigenous, and the white farmers, the evil people. It's not like that. We really have to understand all the oppression that capitalism has brought to us. When we see, the farmers struggle. When we created Milk with Dignity, is with this idea of bringing really economic justice, creating a way to enforce standards that talk about human rights. It's not just better wages. It's not just getting a big house for employees. It's dignity. It's bringing times of rest. It's bringing good environment of work. It's bringing better communication, knowing that there is language barriers. It's bringing tools to the farm where everybody can talk and understand, okay, I respect your work as a milker, I respect your work as, like the other person, the manager, I respect your work. How can we all work together in this? When we don't understand that we all really are struggling, and that also, like one thing that I learned from a friend Jabari is like, yeah, white people are also oppressed and they don't want to see it. They've been lied that, okay, you can own this land, you can be a owner, you can be a business person, and you're going to be successful. And we're hearing all the struggles of our farmers. We are hearing, how difficult it is to find land, it is to find all, following this economic system, following these practices of you have to work your life to bring food to our tables, and we're gonna eat, and then we're gonna take the food to the trash, because we put a lot of, like with I don't have the word in English right now, but people don't appreciate the food. And we are trying to have like healthy food, we're trying to have healthy environment, but at the same time we want to keep up with making the money that we need. We need to keep up with the time that we have to make, and we want to keep up with fighting with this system all the time. Like we want to be there. We have to stop that. We have to stop that and really sit down and figure it out the way that, okay, where are the profits? Who's really making the money? And after that, it's just like, okay, we all have to understand our struggles. We are here together to do this, to make these changes. And when we created Milk with Dignity, was something that still until today, seeing the real changes in farms under the program, it's very difficult for farm owners or for other farmers to understand that, oh, my workers can speak now. Oh, they have something to say. Is this good for me too? Like, yeah, it's good for you too. You're gonna get some economic relief, but also you're gonna get a better work environment. You're gonna be having a place of trust. You're gonna be able to really like manage these farms in a better way. And then we can talk about next steps for different farming from different ways, to be really all acknowledged, because we're bringing the food to our tables and we are what we eat. So I think it's really important to understand, when we talk about collectivity, who wants and who understand really the meaning of being in a collective, right? There has to be a shift of power dynamics. There has to be trust. And how are you going to build trust? How are you going to understand that the person that's working under you, that your employee, can tell you a truth, can tell you, I think the big problem is that we're always trying to keep up with the system. We try to keep up with what is asked for, the certifications. We're always keeping up with trying to, like Amber said, or Naomi said this, we're trying all the time to keep doing the same practices of farming, to keep doing the same that is not working. It's not like that. So yeah, as a collectively thinking about collectivity, we really have to sit down and hear from the people bringing the food to us, everybody there, and attack the real enemies. It's not between us, I don't know if it's, yeah. I feel very passionate when I say these things, but we have to really see that capitalism is our enemy. And that's what we have to do. We really have to address that. Who's making profits right now, not caring about COVID because they can be on their own mansion, just making more profit because people are going to the stores, buying a lot of food, really feeling scared and trying to get whatever, while the workers still working non-stop. So yeah.
Yes, I'm seeing people in the chat, and I'm seeing the other panelists really nodding to what you're saying. And I do think, a lot of our work and a lot of the healing that we're talking about before is really about unlearning this narrative lie that we have been fed of separation, individuality, that's going to be expressed in this capitalist society, as you say, through, our individual efforts to survive, and rather shift and say, actually, we all need each other, and we're only here for each other. We're only defined by how we show up for each other and in our relationships to each other. And that's not what we're raised in this place, in this time. What most of us are raised in. Maybe some are raised without that narrative. But that's not the water, again, in which we're swimming. And so how do we do this work? And as you said, in an urgent way. I mean, we're using 50 years because it's been 50 years. But you're right, we can't wait 50 years. At the same time, this work is healing work that's slow. But I do think, as you say, like, if we're willing to really listen, maybe it happens really, really fast. It's just like the earth is very, very resilient, can bounce back really quickly if any love is shown, any attention is shown. How might that apply to this collectivism and the sense of community? And I think these fractures between farm owner and farm worker are often not even coming from the farming community, but they're coming from these pressures, as you're saying. And so how do we say, like, no, we're not going to be defined by that. We're actually going to do it a different way. It's a lot. I really appreciate what you're saying, all of you. Abbie, my next question for you is about the fact that you sit on our state's climate council, which is a body that's been sort of legally put in place to provide oversight, actualization of this Global Warming Solutions Act in Vermont. So climate resilience and ecological thriving are imperative for our shared future, and they're very sort of wrapped up in both environmental and social justice futures. In this future, we're talking about how will farmers, farm workers, food producers be positioned as key ecosystem stewards and leaders? So connected to what Marita's saying, how are the people, tending land and producing food centered in this work, and how might our farming practices shift accordingly as well?
Well, clearly there is a potentially long path here. I hope, as Marita said, we don't have the luxury of time. These realities have to be addressed now. I think that as we're hearing themes of visibility and trust and storytelling. And so I applied to be the Farm and Forest representative to the Climate Council for that exact reason, that I think so often policy is made in isolation of the people who have to carry it out. There's an enormous difference between scientific expertise and applied expertise of science or of observation or anything else that someone who is working in tandem with land is going to have access to. And obviously that again brings up all of the issues of who has access to land, and that is an enormous component of all of this work as I see it. How do we shepherd forth a vision of agriculture that allows for the healing of all people on land? And I think, as Marita said, we are what we eat. And so we're existing in this system that overall the large themes, the profit that's driving it, this is toxic, right? And so thinking about it in a climate framework, I just think of that as, how do we go back to tending Mother Earth? And so that's what I'm hoping to bring there. And I see a future where it is going to be crucial that the voices at the table are fully representative of the people who are working in and out every day to bring food, not just food. This isn't just about food. This is about the earth as well, and the relationship that we all have. I just hope that any work that I do there can really bring home the interconnectedness of everything. You pull on one strand anywhere in nature and it impacts something somewhere else along the line. And our current policies and ways of thinking about climate or farming or food just don't address that whatsoever. And so it is just as crucial that the people who are producing food live lives of dignity as it is that the people who access the food can access it through a lens of dignity as well, right? So you're dealing with all these issues, not just of the lack of dignity of the farm worker, but the lack of dignity for the folks who can't access nutrient-dense, healthy, nourishing food for a number of different, again, largely policy decisions, terrible policy decisions. And so I don't have any specific answers or solutions at this moment, but I'm hoping to assist in shepherding forth a process where different voices are brought forward in hopes that whatever we are creating moving forward is not just a Band-Aid on what we are existing in now, because as we're hearing, this isn't working. You know, we tend to rely on the same voices and the same expertise and the same people, and it's not working. And so I just hope we can build a process moving forward that really honors a completely new vision of food resilience and foodways and food sovereignty in this state.
Thanks, Abbie. Yes. So again, on this theme of, all of us together and really centering more voices than one, how do you do that in these structures where there's often, one representative, and what do those processes look like? Is a good question. I want to ask you both, Amber and Naomi, on this theme of collectivism. Again, you're currently building a farm business and all of the work that you already do in this collective structure. Can you also just speak? And I want to say, in our planning session, a lot of what came out was this theme around collectivism and we want to go it together. So I'm just interested in hearing more from y'all about collectivism and collaboration as a tool for movement building, both in how collectivism and collaboration will build more broad and diverse movements, and also sort of businesses in the future, or businesses, organizations, groups of people doing things differently. Should we expect more and more to be structured differently as we turn our attentions to this collective way? I'll let y'all decide who wants to go first based on secret eye motions.
Do you want to go first, Naomi?
I'll go first, but thank you, Amber. But before I start, I want to just say two things. One is that I am really bad at panels, and I'm not always the best at answering the question that's being asked of me. And sometimes I just kind of answer the question that I feel is being asked of me. So there's that. And then secondly, because we had the questions before, I sort of pre-thought about and pre-wrote what I was going to say. And I just want to acknowledge that there's been some really beautiful concepts, ideas, thoughts being shared right now around collectivism and around working together, and how really capitalism is what we should be working against. And so what I share next isn't meant to take away from that. It's really more to acknowledge that some of us come from cultures that don't have their skills with land recognized, right? So we think about migrant workers, and we think about descendants of enslaved people and sharecroppers, and we're thinking about even indigenous stewards of the lands, right? But what's not centered is just how skilled with the land that we are, how much inherent ancestral knowledge of farming and what we call farming that we have. And so I just want to bring that to the table too. And that also that we come from cultures that not only just center the land, or cultures that are land centered, but center the land as kin and relative. And so an application, right, of collectivism in this sense is really an act of reclaiming culture, right? At SUSU, our collective work our collaborative work is really about reclaiming culture. Because collaborative collectivist models are both indigenous and Afro-Indigenous in origin, and they can seem really new and really radical, but they're not new models like permaculture, like food forests, like mutual aid. These are all like stolen, borrowed, and recycled tools that have been repackaged primarily for white consumption. They're all useful and they're all positive, but they're whitewashed, right? And because of this, there's really no need to like reinvent anything, to reinvent the wheel. We can look at our histories and we can see how beneficial they've been and are still to both people and movements, right? So if we can look at the Black Panthers, right, just for a second. Like WIC is a super supportive program that gets food to pregnant people and to families with like young children and babies, but that program started with the Black Panthers. If we look at a community like Greenwood, which is what we call Black Wall Street, which is one of the most prosperous Black communities in the entire nation, I'm not a super capitalist, but even I can see the power of collectivism at work, the pooling resources to generate collective wealth together. And then even community-supported agriculture, what we call CSAs, was envisioned by a Black farmer, right? Ancestor Booker T. Whatley envisioned a farming model called the Clientele Membership Club that embodied collectivism, communities supporting farmers, farmers supporting communities. So collectivism has always been a part of our movements, historically speaking, and it's a part of our ancestral traditions too. The name of our farm kind of speaks to that. And reflects how it's been a successful model in Afro-Indigenous and Afro-Caribbean communities. In West Africa, a SUSU is a form of community banking where each month members will contribute a set amount of money, like for instance, $50, right? And each month, one member receives the pooled resources. So if you have like 10 people in your SUSU, then like once a month, one person will receive like $500. And then figuring out who gets that $500 each month depends on understanding who's in your community and knowing what their needs are. So if there's somebody who has an urgent need, they'll get the $500 first. And if there's somebody who's like saving, they can wait till the end to receive that $500. But it really depends on really understanding who your community is and building trust with them. And that's a huge part of building SUSU, both, you know, the system as well as our little farm. And also part of what collectivism is knowing what's a birthright, right? Like what's a birthright, what's a basic need, and what should and what shouldn't be commodified, right? And it's working to unlearn the language and practices of capitalism in order to return to that way of living and being together, all of us being together. So it's not about reinventing the wheel. It's not about that. Our histories and our stories of survival speak to that. But what's important is understanding how we can use the tools and traditions of our ancestors and forebears in a way that's relevant to this present moment. We call that Sankofa. It means looking back to move forward. It means going back and getting those things and bringing them into the present moment, and then building off what has already been done, and then using that to sort of bring about that 50-year vision from this moment, right? It's playing a long game. It's sowing the seeds this moment that will bear fruit in generations to come. It's reclaiming culture, it's reclaiming language, it's reclaiming foodways, it's reclaiming connection to land so that our children will grow up in it and never have to experience that barrier. And I know I'm supposed to be speaking about broad and diverse movements, but I have to be honest and say that I maybe don't even know what that means. But I do know that like a return to what we are calling collectivism will build a more sustainable future for everyone that comes after us. And as far as farming businesses, thriving to me means sustainability, and sustainability means working towards what's best for everyone, and that includes the land.
I'm seeing some snaps and a lot of nods, but Amber, I'm gonna let you speak too, please.
Yes, all that, everything Naomi said. Yeah, and I think it's just important to think about, like, a lot of times we just make it really complex, you know, like, but it's really super basic and it's super simple, and it's not even like we really have to create a bunch of stuff, because most of these things are already here. It's just we're not looking at them, you know, and that's intentional, right? Like our culture is, well, not our culture, but there's very specific people with a lot of power and resources that their whole function in this world is to make sure that they can maintain those power and resources. Like everyone's talking about capitalism, like it's really a fight against the poor people. You know, that's like what capitalism is. And so like the ability to create collectivism or these things, that's all here. And, you know, like mutual aid, all these things that Black and brown people have been doing for hundreds of years and have worked successfully. But if we also look at what has happened when people have done those things, like what happened with Black Wall Street, what happened with MOVE, bombed, what happened to MLK, what happened to the Black Panther Party, systematically destroyed and you know, like dismantled by our government. Like this is very intentional. It's not an accident. And like you can even see like if you look at like what happened with COVID, you know, as soon as COVID happened, how long did it take for us to have massive media about like how to protect each other? How long did it take to get like shields and all these things in stores? How long did it take for television shows to have people with face masks on them in commercials? How long did it take to like change the entire culture of how we think about safety in these things? It took a few months to do that, you know? So like shifting culture doesn't take that long, and it doesn't need to take that long. It's just that we, you know, like it's very intentional that that's not happening. It's not that we don't have the resources or the imagination or the capacity or ability to do it. It's because it's a direct threat to capitalism, and we live in a capitalist culture, you know? So I think that, you know, like when you ask, should we expect more businesses to be structured differently? I don't think that's something that we can expect, because I think businesses thrive on capitalism. But I think that if we want to create like collective systems and structures, then we do have to think about the ways that we redesign things, and like how Naomi's talking about, like what is commodified and what's not, you know, like what is a birthright and what are the things that we should all have access to, and how do we, you know, look at those different things, and starting to look at like, for example, we had this thing in Brattleboro, I think other states too, or other towns in Vermont too, where it was like the farm to family box. But what was that? That was like rations of Pop-Tarts and Rice Krispie treats and military food and like all of this like produce and chicken nuggets and all these things from corporations. That's not, and we live in a state that's filled with like every other person you know is a farmer. You know, like all of that money could have rebuilt our entire economy of, you know, like all the farmers and the people who are really here, but it didn't. It went to the government, you know, that's capitalism. And that's not because we don't have the resources to put into our communities. It's because of the war against poor people, you know? So I think that it's possible, and I think it's happening, but I think that if we really want to create these like cultures of liberation and collectivism, we really have to look to the wisdom that's already here, to the people who are most silenced, most oppressed, most harmed by these systems, who are often the people who already have created, you know, these ways of mutually taking care of each other and like, you know, these cultures of liberation. We just have to, you know, have the eyes to see and be able to move in the direction of the people who are already doing that work, and start to invest in our people instead of invest into our government, which is often harming us.
Yeah, there's a lot coming up, and you know, I'm really sitting with this idea that you shared, Naomi, of Sankofa. Like, we don't need a new idea. We don't need to come up with like some new solution. We need to go back to what we have lost, and, you know, like rebuild, reconnect, heal in that way. We've had a number of questions come in, and we have not a ton of time together left. We have about 10 more minutes on this panel. And thank you for the questions that are coming in. You know, one question that came in is around, which I think is really helpful. What do you see as indicators that will be indicators of success in building a new system that's resilient and sustainable? So this idea that, you know, okay, we're not fixing the system, we're building something new. How will we know that that's happening? So I just want to like does anyone feel like they could say, this is an indicator? Does anyone have an indicator? Abbie has an indicator. More than one person can have an indicator too. Go, Abbie.
Oh, sorry. I was like waiting for everybody else to say, here's my, yeah, I have indicators.
You start with your indicator. We'll get to another.
So to be frank, when I came back to the farm here, I was 25 on the heels of a nervous breakdown and having spent a week in the Brattleboro retreat. And so my journey back to the farm, which was a tricky one for reasons we won't go into today, but I was able to, because of this privilege of intergenerational land wealth, and to find healing on land. And so an indicator to me would be the ability of anyone who is wishing and hoping and needing to find healing through on land would have the ability to do so. I don't, again, like Amber said, it's not really that complicated. It's, if somebody has a desire to come back to land in whatever capacity that means and to find healing there, that ability needs to exist.
Yeah.
That would be a pretty straightforward indicator for me.
Yeah, that's a great indicator. Anybody else got an indicator real quick before we go to the next question? I love these like concrete ideas.
Well, I can say, during COVID, my biggest fear was I have a full house. Everybody's back home. There's no food. What am I going to do? But, concrete things is like the things that are happening, for example, the SUSU collective or other things that they were able to create a community where we could have access. People that didn't have access to these things have access not only to the specific food or things, but to the space to talk about these things, to the space to feel like, oh, yes, we are a community. Yes, we can do these things. And I think for me, an indicator it was a panel, but I don't think it was a panel, but it was only people of color speaking and all the rest just listening. There was no questions and we were just sharing. And there was like, I think Amber did some kind of a ceremony at the beginning to opening the space. And it was just being able to have access to these spaces to really talk and share and say these things and feel like even though everything is burning, we are able to have this because whoever had the Zoom idea or whatever gave us the space and we were able to do these things. So I think a very indicator is just seeing like, okay, we're here today talking about these solutions. When maybe 10 years ago, NOFA wouldn't open their space for these conversations. So being here right now also is a big indicator of that things are moving forward, I think.
Did I see you unmute, Amber, with an indicator?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think an indicator for me is that you will definitely see people having access to their needs being met, like basic needs being met without needing charities or all of these like external forces. Like people will have access to what they need. And you'll also see, like the people who are often not resourced having the resources that they need. So like Black and Indigenous and people of color organizations, or just people in general, you'll be seeing having a redistribution of, access to land and resources.
Thank you. Kids, I think the presence of children in all of our spaces is a really good indicator. Jenna or Taylor, do either of you have an indicator you're thinking of that you want to share? No pressure, but.
I feel like we're like, you go. Those are mine though. I want to listen. I also listened in on that panel that Marita was talking about, and I just felt like this is what I want. I need to be learning from the people who are doing something different than what I'm doing. I need to be learning from the people who are working for the person down the road from me. I need my CSA membership to look different. I have all this, I'm great at fundraising for underserved communities, but those people aren't coming to me and I don't know how to find them. And I want to know how to interact with more people than my bubble. I want my bubble to be huge. I want a bubble bath in 50 years.
Nice. Jenna, do you have anything to add to the vision of a collective bath, which may or may not be everyone's jam on this call? No judgment. COVID may have you feeling like, I just can't wait until I can get a bath with as many
people around, and I do baths a lot lately, so that's where I'm at.
Some people are giving you props for a bubble bath. COVID may make you feel like there is no future in which I'm in a stranger bubble bath or any bubble bath even, but whatever you feel is legitimate. Jenna, do you want to share any indicators?
I think you guys covered a lot of it. I actually did really like what you said, Grace, about kids and just seeing kids involved in the food systems and like coming to farms and experiencing agriculture and I guess how that is a great indicator of success of getting the next generations involved.
Thanks. So, I've seen a number of other questions. Folks raised up a question of tools like social media, how they're impacting, supporting, or inhibiting progress growth. I want to be respectful of folks' time. There are so many good questions here, but I promised you all space to speak to any other parts of your vision of the future. And I want to hear from you each before we're done with our time together. So I'm going to call on you again. Marita, do you want to start with any other pieces of your vision that haven't gotten spoken yet?
That's interesting. Well, no borders. No, I'm just saying, I think it's really important to see, to hear, how we can really have the resources. We have to know how to share them. We have to know how to bring up ourselves to the table and really talk to each other. For me, being in this spaces, speaking in English, even that I can speak and understand very well, better than maybe 3 years ago, is still a challenge. Representing a community that cannot be here either because not only language access, but internet and a device to bring their voices is also a challenge. So I think it's really important also to bring these panels and these conferences that are so important, but bring them to reality in our places, in our communities, and have these conversations with the people at place and find people where they are at. So yeah, I don't know. I think my vision is like, it's so big. I dream of having cooperatives, the co-ops when people can really be ownerships, but at the same time working there and at the same time sharing they're making decision and all that. I've been in so many different ideas with different workers doing different things around the state, around this collectivity. I didn't have the word before until you said it. I was saying collectivity. And I think we can do this. We can do this, like just the other day, you, Grace, and I were talking about how we're going to do this about the Milkers Relief Fund. And it's like, I cannot do it without you. I need you. You need me to bring this. I need all of you. And you need me to really start making change. And I think that's it. That's that we need to acknowledge, really. If we're going to be real and we're going to be true about bringing all the voices that need to come together, let's not just stop in this Zoom, in these panels, in this conference. We really need to bring this to our communities and put it in place.
Yeah, so much yes. to all that. Jenna, you want to speak anything that you haven't gotten to say?
Sure, yeah. And I also, this kind of plays off of what you mentioned, social media, and whether like how that's a helpful tool. I guess my vision in the next 50 years would be to see even stronger connections from individuals to consumers to farmers, and then also likewise farmers to the consumers. And just kind of goes back to what I was talking about storytelling, and how storytelling has such a big impact on like the value of your food, and sharing that history, I think, is so important. So I just think those connections can bring such a you know, I don't know how to phrase it, but I guess build a deeper relationship with your community. And the Facebook and Instagram, I think, and maybe Taylor can speak on this too, because I know she has a very large following on Instagram, but I think that's a great way to be able to continue to share stories with people and connect them to the food, you know, as from our farm after they leave our farm. That's one way that we maintain those relationships, and people continue to come back and have this positive experience in relationship with food, I guess.
Thank you. Yeah. Taylor?
Oh, I'm reflecting on what I just said about my bubble bath, and just the fact that I can even say that, oh, I want to go learn from the guys who work down the road, but then like, unless Marita's vision comes true, then I'm still taking, you know. And how do we create some equity in knowledge is a question I keep coming back to over and over. Which I guess I'll play that into social media, because that is something that I try to do a lot. I feel like there's a lot of kind of top-down information in agriculture, and trying to share it with as many people as possible to both inform the community about what farming is actually like, as well as sharing knowledge amongst farmers feels important. It's also, it is a nasty world out there, social media, and the more I do it, the more I wonder why I'm doing it. And so with everything we've been talking about, there's such a balance and such a constant questioning of what we're doing and why we're doing and who we're doing it for. And I think what this panel has really brought to me is that questioning and that curiosity is really what's so important, and to continue forward with that curiosity.
Thank you. Amber, do you want to share?
Sure. You know, I think what I like, part of the vision that I see is just, you know, I really want to see Black and brown people coming to Vermont, but staying, and not having it be so intolerable that they have to leave. And like, I envision like creating a space that can be replicated, or that inspires other Black and brown people to create spaces here too, so that there's so many spaces where our people can go to access, you know, safety and connection, and the ability to just like thrive and be and heal and have access to food and our needs being met, and just to like see that happen, and just to see like Black men and little Black boys like having like extreme amounts of joy just exuding from them, you know, in Vermont, in one of the whitest states, but having it become not one of the whitest states, but a state that is just filled with, you know, people having access to joy and safety, and is safe for other people to come and want to be here. Because I think everybody wants to have access to fresh air and big open spaces where they can feel safe and they can breathe, and they're not, you know, surrounded by just kind of like the waste that's dumped on us from our government, or people deciding like what areas are worthy based on who's there. And so I just really see this becoming a space, or what I envision, where our people can be and thrive, and also have safety.
Yes, thank you. I love that vision of joy. And I'm noticing that Megan is asking folks as we're wrapping up if you want to drop a link into our chat. So we'll be sharing this out with everyone who's here today, but also with everyone who's accessing our recordings. So if you want to drop a link in the chat to how folks can learn more about your work or your organization and support, that would be great. Abbie, you want to add to your addition?
I don't know that I have much to add. I'm loving soaking for a moment in the visions of all of these amazing caregivers here. I was raised in a tradition of stewardship, and so I guess that's a lot of what I think about too, is how do we nurture a culture moving forward of stewardship, of community, of people, of dignity, of place, and really centering that at the core of the work that we're doing to ensure that all beings are being nurtured in the world that we're creating as we move forward. I know that's very broad, but
Into it. These are vision.
Broad vision. And bubble baths for everyone.
Naomi, do you want to bring us home?
Yeah, thank you. I guess really my last thoughts are basically the answer to the previous question, like what do I consider an indicator? And that's really also speaking to pieces of what almost everyone has said. And I would love to see an end to the cycles of exploitation of land and people and practices, right? And so that's speaking to equity, and that's speaking to like possibilities of cooperatives, like different models of how we steward, like Abbie spoke to, and how we steward together. And so being able to see people thriving at all aspects and roles and levels of farming and farming culture would be really encapsulate my vision for the future.
Yes, so much yes to all of this. I'm going to be holding this. Thank you. I'm seeing some gratitude in the chat for y'all. Thank you so much for your time and for speaking these visions so that we can all move collectively towards them. I really appreciate you being here today. And folks who are here, we'll have a link to the recorded discussion today go out in next week's email. And for those who are not here today, you'll be able to see it there. So thank you all. It's been such a privilege to spend this time with you. I'm going to ask our panelists to hang on for just a moment and say goodbye. And thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone else.